Former Baltimore Ravens safety and now current New York Jets safety Chuck Clark threw some shade at the Baltimore Ravens organization in an interview with the New York media. We talk about that and what it could mean. Also dive into an update on Lamar Jackson's reported OTA attendance status and much more coming up next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here, as always, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here with me today on this midweek edition Wednesday episode, making us your first listen each and every single day. We're free and available anywhere you get your podcasts, all podcasting platforms, also in video form on YouTube. So wherever, however you're watching, thanks for being here with me today. If you're an everyday, you listen every single day. If you're new to the channel, or if you're somewhere in between, welcome here to the show. And again, 5-day-a-week Ravens podcast, Monday through Friday. So any Ravens news, analysis, updates. If you want the local perspective as opposed to maybe a national one, they don't know a lot about the Ravens sometimes. And, you know, they try to force some stuff. Sometimes some national stuff is good. But if you want the local perspective, be sure to check out us here daily on Locked On Ravens. And if you have a friend, a family member who wants a Ravens perspective on something, we have them covered over here too. Today, though, we have a very spicy episode, I'll say, especially in the first part of the show, as former Ravens safety, now Jet safety, Chuck Clark, had some interesting things to say to the New York media. And we'll talk about the shade he threw at the Ravens organization, what it means, and more in this first part of the show. Then in the second part, we'll move on to Lamar Jackson's reported OTA status. There has been an update, and a spoiler, it's a positive one for Lamar Jackson. And then finally, we'll move into a confidence check right now at the start. I mean, it started on Monday, but the start of OTAs, the first week of OTAs, a confidence check in the Ravens roster. We'll do a scale of 1 to 10 for me. And then if you yourself have a scale you want to put down in the comments below or comment on Twitter, be sure to do that as well. So tons to dive into today. Let's start off first with Chuck Clark. And so long story short, just some backstory for those who don't know. I'm sure a lot of people do, but for those who don't, Chuck Clark was drafted by the Ravens, late round pick out of Virginia Tech, and worked his way up to being a very worthwhile and important member of the defense. Now, last offseason, the Ravens ended up signing Marcus Williams to a huge, massive contract, and then also drafting Kyle Hamilton in a span of about 1 month. So Chuck Clark, I think, with the role that he had, you know, you sign a big free agent, you draft a big-time prospect at that position. Chuck Clark, I don't think was, necessarily happy with that. And look, I don't blame him personally for that. If two guys came in to challenge you, it wasn't, challenge is a strong word, I'd say, but to play that same position, sure, I guess I'd feel some type of way about it. But Chuck Clark apparently requested to trade that offseason. Baltimore and him were able to come to an agreement on, I guess we don't know the specifics of it, but I'm guessing playing time and snaps and whatnot. The 2022 season ends and Clark gets traded to the New York Jets for late round draft compensation. Now, during this interview that Chuck Clark had with the New York media yesterday, he had some interesting things to say. He said that, he was asked about his time in Baltimore and, talked about the agreement that they had and said that he was ready to get out of there. And he was asked why. And he said the things that were said to me, he said he wasn't being respected at the time. And so, seemed to be very adamant as saying, like, yeah, I'm happy to be out of there, happy to be in New York, et cetera, et cetera. And, you had Jets teammates, DJ Reed saying, happy you're with us now, Chuck, and stuff along those lines. But it's a very big change in tone from what he said 4 months ago on January 16th during exit interviews. He was asked about what his future, what he wanted his future to be. And he said, he wished he could control it. And then was asked, is that in Baltimore? And he said, yeah, this is the team that drafted me. I've been here all my career. I'm comfortable here, the locker room, the guys, etc. Now, look, I will be the first to say a lot can happen in a 4-month period. I know Clark got traded a couple months after, so I guess in a 2-month period. So maybe, they came to the agreement. They were fine and dandy. And then after the season, Chuck Clark felt disrespected or something. I don't know. Maybe it happened before then. There's so much we don't know in this situation where you can't say, oh, Chuck Clark is being crazy or, oh, the Ravens are such a look. The Ravens track record as an organization. I'm not saying they're perfect. I'm definitely not saying that. No organization is. but their general track record has been a first-class organization. Veterans rave about the organization. There have been some that have had issues. I'm not saying, again, they're perfect, because they're not. Bernard Pollard, I think, is probably the poster child of that. But I don't know what it was. Maybe Chuck Clark just felt disrespected because the Ravens brought in those two guys, and then he didn't feel like the Ravens were, viewing him to his full potential or something. They didn't believe in him. Maybe that's what he was thinking. And this is what I want to get. The point I want to make is the fact that I talk all the time on this show. If you're an everydayer, you know this, about, player speak, coach speak, general manager speak, and just the business-like side to this. Or Chuck Clark on January 16th during those exit interviews, he's still employed by the Ravens. He doesn't have a new team yet. He's not going to sit up there in front of the Baltimore media and say, yeah, I hate it here. I'm disrespected. Get me out. Like, he's not going to say that. Player speak and coach speak and general manager speak is real. Guys just don't go up there and say everything they're thinking, everything they're feeling. Now, I'm not saying every player and coach and GM goes up there and lies. I'm not saying that. I don't even think Chuck Clark was necessarily lying in that situation, but clearly something shifted, and there's not enough information known. But the way the comments came off, and look, I think there are very few ways you can interpret those comments he had yesterday. It is shade throwing, I think, is the right way to put it. But I think he was also just being honest about the situation, more so because he was out of Baltimore and not with the organization, where, if he says that, then maybe teams look at him differently. And I don't think that's right. Like, I don't think if that were to happen and teams were to say, oh, we don't want this guy's not a good locker room guy, I don't think that would have been fair to Chuck Clark. And look, let's be honest, Chuck Clark is someone who was a good player for the Ravens. Was he a Pro Bowler, best safety in the league type guy? No, he was a glue guy. He was, I'd say, above average. I'd say it was an above average safety. But with all the good Chuck Clark did, the communication, the tackling, the physicality, the versatility, we saw the dropped interceptions. He's had some trouble covering tight ends and running backs. So this isn't like the Ravens said, oh, we have the best safety in the league. Let's now bring in Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton to take snaps away from that guy. It was, we have a good player in Chuck Clark. We like Chuck Clark, but we feel like we can utilize him in a better way. At least this is what I think. Maybe I'm wrong, but this is what I think. Where, we can utilize him in a better way. If this is what the Ravens are saying to themselves, is, yeah, we can utilize him in a better way by bringing in Kyle Hamilton, bringing in Marcus Williams, and utilizing the 3 safety rotation that I said so much for. I wanted to see it. Even back with the Sean Elliott, Earl Thomas, Chuck Clark, right? You have those guys. I wanted to see them use a 3 safety rotation, and they did it. And just because I say 3 safeties doesn't mean, oh, you're playing all 3 guys back. Obviously, you can play Chuck Clark up. They played Kyle Hamilton in the big nickel role. It gave them so much versatility, and Clark is a good player. Just because he said these comments doesn't take away from the fact that I think he's a good player, and the Ravens defense would be better with him instead of, I have a lot of confidence in Geno Stone. I won't necessarily say that, but Chuck Clark over Geno Stone is just like, if you have that mindset, it's because, look, Chuck Clark is proven. He's more of a veteran, but Geno Stone has shown those flashes. So I think Geno Stone can come in and have a big impact. If they sign Adrian Amos, maybe he can do some of the same things and play that Chuck Clark type of role. But this is just, Cole Jackson said it, where it's like, he's open to new information, but I think a lot of people did lose respect for Chuck Clark today, and other people have no problem with it. There are 2 very clear camps and 2 very clear sides in this whole situation, where some people are like, oh, Chuck Clark he's a snake. He was never good. Like, this guy's awful. And then there's the other camp that says, well, I don't really have a problem with what he says. It's the chip on his shoulder type mentality, etc. I'm kind of in the middle, where I just think it's weird. Like, I just think it's really odd. Again, a lot can happen in 4 months, in 2 months. So the comments he had on January 16th, and I put that tweet out. The tweet that I put out was the interview from January 16th, and comparing those 2 quotes that he had from January 16th to yesterday on May 23rd. There's a lot that can change and a lot that can happen, but there's so much that we don't know about the situation. Did he feel the disrespect before that interview? Did he feel it after the interview? It seemed like things were fine, and although he did request a trade during the offseason, that's not like wonderful. I mean, look, Lamar Jackson requested a trade, and where are we now? He signed for the Ravens for 5 years. So this is I don't know. I think it's an odd situation overall. Clark is gone now. That is what it is. He's now moved on to the Jets. He can talk and say all that stuff. And the reality is that he's no longer a member of the Ravens. He now plays for the Jets, and we'll see how he fits in with that Jets defense. So very spicy comments from Chuck Clark. And coming up in the second part of the show, we'll be diving into an update on Lamar Jackson. You won't want to miss that. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot to dive into on the show. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs, because right now new customers are getting no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. And I'm so excited. I'm a Denver Nuggets guy. They made the finals the first time in franchise history. If you want to bet on the Nuggets to win the finals or the Eastern Conference opponent to do that, or just, Jokic props, Murray props, do that over at FanDuel. They have great promotions every day. They have a safe and secure app as well. You can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sports book. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. We're back here, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you. We just talked about Chuck Clark and those spicy comments, but let's not dive into a different conversation. Lamar Jackson, someone we've talked about a little bit on the show, not a ton, not a ton. I'm just kidding. Every day for like 3 years, it felt like we talked about Lamar, but the contract situation is over. The attention is now turned to his attendance. He did not show up to football school, those 2 sessions of that, and also was not present for the first day of Ravens voluntary OTAs, but there was an update, and it is a positive one. Jess Rebick at The Athletic reported that he's told Ravens quarterback Lamar Jackson is at the facility ahead of day 2 of OTAs, which obviously is today. So if you're listening to this after OTAs, then you know that, he was either there or he wasn't. Jeff is a very trustworthy source. I trust him, and I think that he's going to be there today, which is going to be awesome for the Ravens. Again, it is my preference he is there, but it wouldn't have been a huge deal if he didn't show up. Again, these are voluntary things, but as the conversation we've had, and I know it's kind of repeating myself, so I won't get too much into this aspect of it, but the way that Lamar has worked over the course of his career, over the course of off seasons, when he hasn't been to the facility, again, he's not just like lazing around doing nothing. He's someone who, it's the off season for a reason, right? You go out there, you have some fun, but you're also working. And some off seasons, posting a lot of video. Other off seasons, more so works in silence. But we know how big of a competitor Lamar is. We know how much he wants to win. Him not being there, and the conversation was like, well, Lamar has a contract. Why wouldn't he be there? Why wouldn't he show up? Well, some guys just want to take time off. They want to work with their guys, like their own personal, like non-organizational people as opposed to organizational people. But I do think it's big for Lamar to be there. And the reason I do believe that is because of the switch. And I talked about this yesterday, the switch in the offense from Greg Roman to Todd Monken, where it's a whole different system. It's not like 100% different. John Harbaugh did say they want to keep some of what Greg Roman did, both running and throwing. That is something John Harbaugh said. But Todd Monken is going to put in this new offensive system, and for Lamar to be there, to run through it with the guys, to be able to point out things on the field, really be face-to-face with Monken in the facility on the field, while he's still working, you can't get that down in Florida, right? You have to be, unless Todd Monken went to him, or maybe he would one of these days, but it's much easier, I would say. And it makes all the difference, I think. Now, not the difference, and I'll be consistent in this because I've been consistent, not the difference where, the Ravens win the Super Bowl if he's there and they don't if he's not. It's not that serious. But the whole conversation last offseason, and the point I've made is, he's missing all this time to catch up on the offense. Greg Roman said he'll be behind, but it'll be fine. And then Lamar Jackson goes out there and plays like the MVP over the first 3 weeks of the season. Now, unfortunately, it did not continue that way, but people were worried about him not being ready for the season and him starting off rusty. And he obliterated the Jets, the Dolphins, the Patriots. Now, they only won 2 of those games because, we can admit it, the defense let him down in that Miami game. But at the same time, now that Lamar is in the facility, and we'll see what it is for the rest of the veterans too, right? Does Odell show up? Do some of these other guys show up? We've seen, I think, a lot in that video that I talked about on yesterday's show that was posted on Monday. We saw guys like Rashad Bateman, Marcus Williams, Patrick Queen, Morgan Moses, etc. So now does the rest of the team start to fill out? It is very rare for a team to have 100% participation in OTAs. I'm not saying the Ravens will. Maybe they do. Maybe these guys are bought in. There's a team kind of rule. I don't know if rule is the right word, but a team rule that, got to be there by this time in OTAs, really get the work in. Maybe that's the case, but we'll see. If Lamar's there, I think that's a great sign for the Ravens overall. And especially, for the way that these coordinators are. The Ravens have 2 pretty new coordinators. Mike Macdonald, a second-year coordinator, Todd Monken, a first-year coordinator with the Ravens. Obviously, Monken has had other NFL experience. But this is big for the defense, too, especially if you can get most of the guys in there because the system is set in place. There wasn't a ton of turnover, as I've talked about. Chuck Clark, who we just talked about, is now gone. Calais Campbell is gone. And there are a couple other pieces around the edges who haven't been brought back, like a Marcus Peters, like a Justin Houston. But for the most part, I mean, Marlon Humphrey is still there. Marcus Williams is still there. Kyle Hamilton, Odafe Owe, Roquan Smith, Patrick Queen, David Ajabo, Justin Metabike, etc. Right? Michael Pierce. You have all these players that are back. And the new guys like Iraq Yassin, you can put them in positions. The young defensive guys, the rookies, Trenton Simpson, Caillou Blue Kelly. I think it's big for those guys. But the fact that the system has been in place for a year, we saw some of the rust, right? We definitely saw the rust early on the defensive side of the ball where, you're installing a whole new defensive system, switching up from a very aggressive Don Martindale defense to Mike Macdonald. The word, you can still use aggressive, but he's less of an aggressive blitzer, I'll say. So, you got to kind of get used to that. And also for Mike Macdonald, he had to get used to calling plays at the NFL level. For as good as he was at Michigan, it's a different animal from college to the NFL. That Miami game, I think, is the prime example where he was playing, he played too soft to end the game and then played too aggressive to end. Like it was the worst balance that you could have there. And over the year, we saw the development of not only the defense, but the biggest part of that, I think, was Mike Macdonald and his development as a defensive play caller, is understand. Not that he's a very smart guy, right? He's one of the brightest young coaches in this league, but just being able to understand the game more as a play caller in that new role was huge for the Ravens. Todd Monken, I don't think you have to go through as much of that because he does have the NFL experience of 3 years of an offensive coordinator position with Tampa Bay, had the year in Cleveland, and the year in Cleveland, he had Odell. So there's the familiarity there already, which is great. Lamar Jackson has said the offense, from what he can tell, looks great. Zay Flowers has said it's perfect for him. So there's a lot to like about this, but the more work you can get in on the field, it's going to be great. And a big part of this also is the strength staff. As I've talked about, Steve Saunders now out. Is Kaji Ismail calls him on this show F-. So you now have an opportunity to not work these guys to the absolute bone, which I think was part of the complaints. I mean, even guys, former Ravens like Derek Wolfe has spoken out about the Ravens and the strength staff and saying these guys just killed you every single day. And, maybe not a lot changes and, the strength staff, because they hired someone from within, maybe it's the same principles and guys still get hurt. But I think getting Steve Saunders out, which in my opinion, again, should have happened a couple of years ago, but getting him out, I think, is a positive step in the right direction, especially after the F- thing. Like that, you just had to do it. And I think actually Saunders got moved on from before that came out, but it just reassured everyone that a better strength staff, less just absolute working these guys every single day, 24 hours a day. I know it's not that serious, but every single day like that. Hopefully there will be a better implemented schedule for them for OTAs. We know Baltimore made a ton of changes after that 2021 season, last off season, where they moved their practices from the morning to the afternoons, implementing break times. So maybe we'll see stuff like that again. I would not think it would be that many changes, but maybe we'll see some little tiny things here and there. So Lamar Jackson reportedly at the facility ahead of day 2 of OTAs here today. We will see if he is actually there. I think he will be. And then we can break it all down tomorrow on tomorrow's show. And of course, on media availability there as well. Quick teaser for tomorrow's show. But coming up in our final segment, we'll do a confidence check in the Ravens roster overall, give it a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of confidence. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot still to get to on Locked On Ravens. We're back here, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you as we dive into a confidence check on the Ravens. But before we do that, be sure to, again, subscribe to the channel and like the video on YouTube, as well as follow along in order form wherever you get your podcast. I really appreciate all the support here. But confidence check time for the Ravens. Again, there's still plenty of offseason left, I think, as we kind of move over from May to June, which is it's coming up so quickly. It feels like just yesterday it was like March and we were just getting ready for free agency. The Lamar situation was crazy. But now Lamar signed, and that's a huge confidence boost for me, at least for this roster, especially after all the uncertainty that came from just, will he be the quarterback? Will he not be the quarterback? There was so much to kind of take into account. But now that Lamar's the quarterback, to me, it's an automatic huge boost because we know what Lamar can bring to the table. I still think there's room for improvement. We saw some of the deep ball accuracy struggles from him last season. And I think for him, decision-making got better last season. I think 2021 was not a great decision-making year for him. 2022, I thought was better, but I think there's still a little room for improvement there. He's dynamic with his arm and dynamic with his legs as well. So as long as Lamar's the quarterback, I think you do really always have a shot. Running back wise, I think they're set there too. J.K. Dobbins looked really explosive, not quite J.K. Dobbins explosive, but after having the offseason to get right completely after having the surgery in 2021 and then another one in 2022. That should be huge. Gus Edwards, Justice Hill, maybe a guy like Keaton Mitchell. Baltimore, I think, is set there. Fullback-wise, it's going to be interesting to see how the Ravens use Patrick Ricard, but Ricard is one of the best fullbacks in the league, despite there not really being a lot of those anymore. Wide receiver-wise, you got to feel good about this room compared to what it was over the past couple of seasons. I mean, players like Odell, Zay Flowers coming in, Nelson Aguilar, also guys who are already there, like Rashad Bateman and Devin Duvernay, plus the tight end room now with Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Charlie Kohler. That's huge. Offensive line-wise, you have Ronnie Stanley. We'll just say Ben Cleveland's the left guard for now unless something changes. Tyler Linderbaum, and then Kevin Zeitler and Morgan Moses on the right side, plus some quality backups. Patrick McCary, definitely one of the most versatile players in this league here. And you have others like Daniel Faalele as well. Then moving on to the defensive side of the ball, defensive line, it's going to be a big year for the young guys. Justin Madubuike, Broderick Washington, and also Travis Jones. You do have veterans still like Michael Pierce and Brent Urban, but the loss of Calais Campbell, I think it's going to be felt to me. That's something I think is going to be felt. Outside linebacker-wise, we'll start outside, then go inside. Outside linebacker-wise, I do think that the Ravens need something else there. It's Odafe Oweh. It's David Ajabo, it's Tyus Bowser, and then Tavius Robinson. I think Justin Houston would be really good for this team, bringing him back. Locked on Ravens legend, Justin Houston, as we call him over here. Other guys available too, Yannick Ngakoue, maybe he could come back for a second stint. His first stint was not good whatsoever. I don't think Baltimore utilized him the right way, and his skill set just wasn't a fit for what the Ravens ran on defense at the time. But there's a new coordinator in town, so maybe it works a little better with Ngakoue. Others like Leonard Floyd, Jadeveon Clowney potentially, but I do think they need something there. Inside linebacker, Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen make up one of the best inside linebacker duos in this league. You also have guys like Trent Simpson, Malik Harrison, Kristen Welch, Josh Ross. So they are very deep and very good at inside linebacker. Corner-wise, as I've said, I'd probably add someone, whether that's a player like a Marcus Peters. There are others here and there. And it also depends what your view is on, do they need another outside guy or a slot guy, someone like a Bryce Callahan, a Chris Harris Jr., some of those players, whereas maybe they could bring in an outside guy and play Kyle Hamilton in the big nickel. Maybe they could, move Marlon Humphrey in the slot, although I wouldn't do that. But I do still think one more addition at corner is needed. I think Rock Ya-Sin was a good start, but I think Peters is someone who you can add, or if you want a slot guy, Bryce Callahan is someone you can add to that room. But Marlon Humphrey, we know, is one of the best in the NFL, 100%. So, you at least have him, but other guys, it is Ya-Sin, it is, other than that, like Trayvon Mullen and Jalen Armour-Davis, Pepe Williams, Kyle Blue Kelly, etc. Safety-wise, they're in a decently good spot there. They do lose Chuck Clark, but they still have Marcus Williams, still have Kyle Hamilton, Geno Stone, who I think is going to be really, really good for them. And then special teams-wise, we know this team's good on special teams. Justin Tucker, the greatest kicker of all time, no questions asked, in my opinion. And you have Jordan Stout, who I think had an up-and-down rookie season. Hopefully his second season is a little bit more consistent for the Ravens, although he did have big shoes to fill his rookie season with Sam Cook, who, was an incredible punter for so many years for them. Then Nick Moore, who has been, was a Pro Bowler last year. He's been really good for them as a long snapper, replacing Morgan Cox. So on a scale of 1 to 10 confidence-wise for this roster, I'll give it a solid 7 right now. I think in this league, you need to have really good corners to win. The Ravens have one, and then a number 2/3 guy. Do they have another move in them? The defensive line also, you got to trust the young guys there. Outside linebacker, though, I think is where my biggest concern is. It would have been corner if they didn't sign Rock Ya-Sin, but I think outside linebacker, it's such a swing position for them this year. They need to have a good pass rush. Obviously, both from the interior and the exterior. It's not just outside linebacker guys. The defensive linemen have to generate interior pressure, which, over the years, they've had some trouble doing. But if Odafe Oweh can't put it all together in year 3, if David Ajabo can't provide some impact in year 2, I expect solid stuff from Tyus Bowser. But I don't know. I feel like that's you need to add there. Offensively, I feel very confident though. Offensively, I give it a 9, maybe even 9.5. Defensively, maybe like a 6.5, 7, 8 in that range. And that's saying something because I think the defense, the way they performed last year, like the way that we saw them end the season, is kind of weird to say, oh, well, the offense is the unit that struggled and I'm giving them a higher grade than the defense. I just look, it's more of an on paper thing right now. But the thing is, with the defense, we've seen it on the field and how it worked out. So I'll go higher. I'll say defense to me is a 7.75 right now, roster wise. And then offense is 9.5. But I just look at the offense and I see the guys on paper and you're just like, this is unbelievable. So I don't know. I feel like Baltimore is set up very well this season. I think still a couple more pieces. If they can add a couple more pieces, it would benefit them in a huge way. But overall, I'd say my confidence in this roster is probably a 7.5 out of 10, but still a lot of offseason left. And that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, follow along in audio form. We'll be back right here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens with more Ravens coverage. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow.